Settle down. I know it's exciting to have a celebrity here, but don't make Nigel feel uncomfortable. First of all, welcome to the second Legal Cheek If I Knew Then What I Know Now event. A fantastic panel again, which we'll meet in a moment. Got some housekeeping. If there's a fire, we're in a wooden building, it seems, so escape through the green signs or the windows. I don't know if you've all got drinks, but if you haven't, it's too late. We'll be here for approximately 4 hours, and then we'll go back through that for some more drinks. Courtesy of the thank yous already, our first sponsors and hosting us today, Patrick Madams, the sub-treasurer of Inner Temple, and Anthony Dursey of Inner Temple as well for the venue, the food? Who knew there's food? And booze, and to the Incorporated Council of Law Reporting, the middle banner here. Please read and come look at the end. For paying for the filming, which will be shown live. You'll sign the waivers on the Legal Cheek YouTube channel in possibly days, weeks, or months in the future. There is a Twitter hashtag. Get out the phones, turn them silent, but do feel free to tweet. We've got Wi-Fi and 3G and things, and 4G if you come from London. And also, I've been told there's an iPad mini available, but it looks like an iPad Air out there, which you should all be entered into the draw for. I think you might have raffle tickets, and we'll be drawing that at the end. I don't think you were allowed to participate because you all paid far too much. So we'll move on as quick as we like, because we want to get the questions to the panel as soon as possible. But I'm going to try and introduce these people in the right order. And starting at the end, Chris Stokes, the Director of Legal Projects at Hogan Lovells, author of All You Need to Know About the City. And I've got some interesting facts about each of them. I believe one's the long-haired rocker.
Does that look like it?
Might be wrong. Oh no, that's you! That's me. Sorry, I'm looking at my thing. I was confused by the hair. So no, I do apologise. Chris is
He's an aging rocker.
A former financial journalist. That's better, we're on the right track. And is now training lawyers. He says that he's working in and around law firms and lawyers because he likes lawyers.
Well, you would say that in this room, wouldn't you?
So that's interesting to know, at first. I'm not saying these are great facts. Next on the list, we have Dominic. Dominic Griffiths, Head of Banking and Finance at Mayer Brown. A history graduate. Do you have any other history graduates here? Oh gosh, 3. Same as Mr. Grayling. We'll make no judgment calls there. And he doesn't have difficult clients. Only ones that don't pay their bills. I think that's right? That sounds right. Okay, good. Moving on. Madhavi Gasani. Madhavi. Now, what can I say about her? She's currently Projects and Infrastructure Partner at Norton Rose Fulbright. And, as I'm sure a few of these people will have, you've got to dress like you work in the city, and you've got to talk like you work in the city. So, I'm not sure which role in the city she has, but we'll find out later on how she speaks, if I eventually get through these introductions. Next up, no introduction needed, Nigel Savage.
What do you expect me to say?
All we'll say about him is that he takes management advice from Sir Alex Ferguson, and move quickly on. What was here? I don't know. Fifth person, Mukul Chola. Criminal barrister, head of 9 to 12 Belliard. He's the man for the legal aid questions.
Not too many.
And they're all coming through me. And he says there are occasionally moments in court where you wish the ground would swallow you up. I'm sure after tonight that won't be limited to being in court. Fiona, Scolding. Sorry, I'm trying to scroll through this as fast as possible. She's social welfare and human rights barrister at Hardwick Chambers. Particular expertise in education law and the early works of George Michael.
That is true.
And finally, eventually, Stephen Goland, the long-haired rocker from not Liverpool.
Durham.
Wrong side of the country. And currently the president of the Chartered Institute of Legal Executives. Congratulations. It's only a temporary post. So we're going to crack on straight away with. Don't get above yourself here. The first question, which is coming from me, through Alex. Is the golden era over for a career as a lawyer? Our cuts to legal aid and consolidation among corporate law firms part of a cyclical pattern that will see the legal profession emerge stronger than ever. So, two-part question. Is the golden era over, or is there going to be a stronger emergence in future? And I think we'll start right in the middle with Nigel.
Thank you. I think that there is an exciting future ahead for lawyers. I think the key word there for me is at the end where you say legal profession, and we're now all in a sort of legal services market. It's not just about the professionals. I think one of the mistakes that was made. In fact, I bumped into in Chancery Lane this morning the guy who was minister in Blair's first government in the what I think it was called Department of Constitutional Affairs then, and he was the guy that initiated the Clementi report and then the subsequent reforms which gave birth to the legal services legislation and the SRA and the BSB and all the rest of it. And I think the mistake we made then was, and I think Clementi's instincts were probably in that direction, was to create one regulator for the legal services market. And that would have enabled us to create a strategy for the legal services sector. And instead of having arguments about whether there's enough work for barristers or whether the solicitors doing this or Alex, we would then have had a strategic plan. And one thing that lawyers are not very good at is actually developing strategies for the future. I mean, I've banged away at the Old Law Society and some of the SRA saying, look, what is our strategy for the future of the legal services market? And then the cops come and then, well, where are we going with globalisation and making qualification more acceptable? Don't know. And one of the mistakes, and I'm just going back in history as always to find solutions, is saying actually we didn't, when the Legislation Legal Services Act was passed and gave birth to the BSB, the SRA and SILEX, they shelved legal education and training. And it's only in the last year that we've started to address it, which is too late because the market has taken off and the firms, the ABSs, the law schools are having to not make it up as we go along, but develop it in the marketplace. So there was a failure to address some fundamental issues right at the outset. But to answer your question, there is an exciting future ahead. It's very different. It maybe won't be the orthodox way of going into a training contract or a pupillage, but there will be over the next few years a lot of employment, interesting employment opportunities created in the legal services market. The problem we're in is that in the last 2 years, it has been the coincidence of a number of factors hitting the legal profession or legal services market all at the same time. I mean, there isn't a profession, whether they be vets or medics or architects, they're all facing the same issues. Those issues are about the drive towards pushing more work down the chain where the past was done by fully qualified people to more what we call paralegals or medics call nurses or veterinary assistants or whatever. And that comes back to this we've got 3 regulators. Their first instinct is to protect their own little territory and not think strategically about how we as a sector and working with the government can address some of these fundamental issues about how you deliver cost-effective legal services to the public and how you make up for the massive advice deficit that there is there. Loads and loads of people who have no access to advice. So I mean, I'm going into speech mode here, but I think fundamentally, yes, there are exciting opportunities through the orthodox pupillages, through the orthodox training contracts, but the interesting phase, I think, which is now just commencing, is that there's always been a paralegal market in certain sectors, personal injury and those areas for 20 years. The only way those firms could make money was pushing more work down to paralegals. The exciting bit moving forward is the extent to which there will be a disaggregation of legal services in the corporate sector. It's just beginning. You can see some of the work that Alan Schultz are doing, some of the work that Review Law are doing, which potentially will revolutionise the delivery of legal services in the future. But you know, look at it. I know it sounds tough for you. You're all, you know, sending out your nth application and getting your nth rejection. But you know, there are signs there. The market has corrected itself. We have a backlog of students looking for pupils and looking for training contracts. But the market has corrected itself. There are now, I forget the precise figures, but this year the number of training contracts increased. The number of students passing the LPC is about 7,000.
Well, we might come back to this later, but for those of you with medium-term memory loss, the question was, is the golden era over?
No, it's not.
As a lawyer?
My answer is, I mean, you know, it's not a black and white answer, but my answer is the golden year the time as it was is over. But there's a much more sensible approach because, you know, there's so many issues hitting the profession. You know, coming out of the recession, globalization, clients being much more aggressive, and the balance of power changing from the law firm to the client, the business models of law firms, the competitive environment. And
let's get a corporate viewer's opinion on this. So, Chris, you're not practicing as a solicitor as it was at the moment. You're working with a load of solicitors who you love. What's your view on this? Is the golden era over? You've jumped ship.
I'm not necessarily going to give you a corporate view, but 20 years ago, Nigel, when he was still heading Nottingham Law School, before he moved to what is now University of Law, he launched an MBA for lawyers, and I was very fortunate to be one of the external faculty who helped deliver this MBA. And when we launched it, we thought the people that we would get on it would be people from the sort of firm I'm at now, very large, big law firms, and they weren't. They were managing partners from small and medium-sized firms. And because up until that point, I'd grown up in a big firm, and I only knew big law firms, I laboured under the rather unfortunate misapprehension that you get the cleverest lawyers in the biggest law firms. So what I learned from that is, it's not true at all. We had managing partners from 6 partner firms in places like Liverpool who were millionaires. And the reason they were so rich was because they had turned their part of the legal profession on its head, and they were being genuinely innovative. And what I see stretched before us now, even though, as Nigel says, it is tough for you at the moment, law will always be there. It's one of the big forces that is out there in society. There will always be a demand for law. And what I see happening, and you can't really look to the big law firms like the one I'm with to drive change. You always have to look at the other end of the profession. But I see lots of things happening, especially with the Legal Education and Training Review at the moment. The drive for diversity. We need a profession that reflects the society that it serves, and we don't have that. The different types of lawyer that you can be nowadays. The old model when I was growing up was you became a solicitor or barrister or nothing. Now you can do loads and loads of different things. I mean, the Child Institute of Legal Executives represented at the other end of the table. That is a great route through. I've taught on that programme at my local FE college as a pro bono activity, and that is a great way of becoming a lawyer. So what I see happening is actually a whole opening up of the legal profession, different ways of working, the drive for diversity. I think it's an incredibly exciting time. I do say to young people who want to become lawyers, don't do it for the money, because you'll never earn enough to reward you for the effort that you have to put in, the risks that you take, and the stress. But the opportunities are out there for those who are keen and dynamic. But you've got to be prepared to change and drive change. And if that's the sort of young person you are, then I think the opportunities are absolutely brilliant.
And Stephen, you mentioned Silex already, and I was talking about pushing sort of the work, if you like, down the chain to paralegals. But paralegals have got an option as well. And just to introduce Silex first of all, but also, is this the new way forward? Is this the alternative?
Well, I mean, Silex have been around for 51 years now, and I qualified that way. I qualified as a chartered executive and a solicitor as well. And in my eyes, there's absolutely no difference. And I think there seems to be more of a merging professions now. I think that's more and more evident in the last sort of 5 years. And I think in relation to paralegal, I mean, certainly Silex, our lawyer members, our non-fellows, as it were, to be a fellow at Chartered Institute, are paralegals. So we do regulate and train a great deal of paralegals. I think that's certainly the way that law firms seem to be going. It seems to be. I mean, I think you're right about saying it does go in cycles, because I remember the early 90s, and that was a big recession as well, and certainly training contracts, etc. Legal jobs were hard to come by. I know my wife, who qualified as a solicitor, she struggled and worked in a crappy job, basically for 2 years, working on reception, making cups of coffee. But it was a law firm, so when the opportunity came up for
She's a paralegal, is
no,
she?
she's a solicitor. She teaches law. Actually, she's
I'm
a
sure all these
law
guys
lecturer.
paralegaling how to make a cup of tea.
No. I mean, that was how she started. I mean, I think that's the thing, especially when training contracts are hard to come by. You've got to take the opportunities where they are, and if that is doing a crappy job for a year or so in a law firm and getting a little bit of experience and building that up, when you come to then apply for a training contract, you've got some relevant experience potentially. I think that's a big thing. I wouldn't be afraid or turn your nose up at something that perhaps is maybe not what you imagined your career would start out like, but if it's a start, it's a start. I mean, you've got to.
I mean, just on that point, I mean, some of the best finance lawyers in my department were paralegals.
Well, I started off as a paralegal 20 years ago, and I did make cups of tea, pick up dry cleaning, babysat, and did a job as well. So
But people who spend 4 or 5 years as a paralegal in a firm, and there are many reasons why you might become a paralegal as opposed to a qualified lawyer initially. The level of commitment and knowledge of the firm and knowledge of our clients is strong, and actually, in some ways, people have had a knockback from time to time. Maybe sort of something's happened in their life which has meant that they've ended up, heaven forbid, with a 2-2 or not 3-star A's from those places.
I think it's been the way the Silex route works. You start at the bottom, you work your way up. I mean, I started as an apprentice on what was then called the employment training scheme of £35 a week, where you got your placement, and there was me in my badly sort of pressed suit with my long hair, going to court, looking very, you've seen the pictures, so you know what it looks like. But I think from that way, from learning from the bottom up, I mean, I started working on reception and doing photocopying and then shadowing my boss and doing the exams and studying a little bit, and eventually sort of built it up. And I think if you start off at that grounded level and you work your way up, I think it can, as we've heard, make some of the best lawyers that you come across.
So how's life different to the bar? What's changed? Are we still in the golden age, or is it long gone?
We are in the golden age to an extent, and depending upon the area of work that you want to go into. But can I just repeat what Chris said? If you want to make a lot of money, don't come to the legal profession, because all it is a lot of very, very hard work, very long, very antisocial hours, but from my point of view at least, it's great fun. And that makes up an awful lot for the hours, the lack of money and the like. But you've got to be really passionate about what you do. You've got to find something that's really going to inspire you and to keep you. And we all know, particularly in my area, which is the criminal world, we all know what attacks there are. We may hear more about that in the course of the evening. But there are lots and lots of opportunities in different areas of the law which give you the chance, if you want to be an advocate, to be an advocate. But don't think the bar is your only route to being an advocate. There are some fantastic solicitor advocates out there in all sorts of disciplines, and I've seen a number of them both in the crime and the regulatory discipline. So don't feel that if you want to be an advocate, the bar is your only route. It isn't. And the great thing about going, for example, into a solicitor's firm, depending on the sort of law you want to do, is there is almost no limit to what sort of law you can do. The parameters keep changing. There are no fixed parameters. So think carefully about what you want to do.
Good. Last word.
Well, I think I would agree. I think it depends what kind of law law you want to do, I think the golden age for the publicly funded bar has gone, or is going, is in the process of going. But the commercial bar will tell you that it is booming because of the amount of overseas litigation that's currently happening in London. So if you wanted to be a commercial lawyer or you want to do that kind of work, you know, especially from talking to friends of mine that do that kind of work, if you have ability with languages and those sorts of facilities, they're specifically recruiting people, for example, at the moment that can speak Russian, can speak Spanish, because the bar, like in the way that law firms in England really have globalised, that small aspect of the bar is really globalising now in terms of the work that it does and where it does it. So from that perspective, if that's what you want to do, then that's great. But I think I would probably echo what Muckle said, that there are lots of ways to be an advocate, and they don't all involve having to come to the bar. And like Muckle, I've met very many excellent solicitor advocates and people who don't have solicitors' qualifications at all in a lot of the work that I do, but who are absolutely excellent advocates and enjoy that side of it. So,
talking about globalisation, I'm going to move on to the next question, which is, would you consider a qualification such as the New York Bar exam as an asset to a law firm, or to chambers indeed, in the UK? I might go through one line, a yes or no, and the reason why. I saw Nigel shaking his head again, so I'm going to start with you.
No, because
Did the University of Law do a New York Bar exam?
well, nobody does a New York Bar exam except the New York Bar. There is a wider sort of strategic issue here, which is the reason why so many young people around the world, particularly in China, are doing the New York Bar. It's the most. There are two global qualifications. One is the English solicitor qualification, and the bar for that matter, and the other is the New York Bar. The New York Bar is by far the most accessible because providing you've done a degree that's the right length, or you've done an LLM in anything in law in an ABA accredited law school, you can fly in and take the New York Bar. Basically, the New York Bar, like all local bars, is jurisdictionally based. It's no preparation for operating in the global legal services market, either for a law firm or for a set of chambers, but it's a means to an end. Now, one of the things I've been banging on, and hopefully we might get an outcome in the LETR, is to make the English qualification, the solicitor qualification, and the bar is, the solicitor qualification, more accessible to the global market. The bar always has been. Amongst all this criticism of saying you're taking too many people to the bar, a large percentage of the young people that do the bar in England and Wales are from Malaysia and Singapore, and they go back and they take our values back and they set up in practice, and it's recognised in Singapore and Kuala Lumpur and Hong Kong, and that spreads the word, and it's helped build and sustain the brand of the bar in the global market.
Marvin.
Well, it depends entirely on what you want to do and where you want to practice. If you want to work in New York, go for the New York Bar. If you want to work for a big law firm, global law firm, like ourselves, New York Bar, yes, big tick. You can go and work in New York or even Washington. So I think it depends entirely on what you want to do. I come from India, where an added qualification is always a great thing. So I would definitely say it's an advantage if you can do it. If it's that easy, I would say why not?
Quick question, does anybody on the panel have the New York Bar accreditation? Okay.
It's too difficult.
Dominic, is it an advantage? Or not just this one, but any other qualification?
No, it's not necessary. And I think there's probably a number of people who think perhaps to get a good job in a big US international firm is a great idea. It's not necessary. But I think we're in slight danger here of being a little bit patronising, potentially to the audience, but certainly to the general public and the kind of people who think of coming into law. At the end of the day, yes, I don't particularly advocate to my children, for example, go into the legal profession because it's a great way to make a life, it's a great way to make money. But there are a lot of people out there who, looking at the professions, looking at opportunities in life, may well think that. And in a very, very uncertain environment, particularly over the last 6 or 7 years, in a recession, there is, like it or not, whether it's true or not, some advantage to going into the legal profession in comparison to certain other In terms of the New York bar, a New York qualification, it's not necessary. Yes, the English law qualification is eminently transportable, and I'm not going to talk that down in any way whatsoever. It's something that firms like Walter & Rhodes, Meyer, Hogan Lovells and others benefit from enormously, particularly now, right now, where not just in the emerging markets where English law and New York law has been used a lot in order to satisfy international investors, actually in Western Europe as well. The amount of Spanish, Italian law firms and lawyers who are coming to us for international law advice because international investors are wanting those governing laws in their documentation is on the rise. But you know, New York law, the New York bar qualification is eminently transportable as well. It just depends where you are in the world. If you want to do work in South America, for example, you know, it's a way up between English law and New York law. So, you know, you see people doing it, but also because it's a way into, it's one of the ways into big US law firms who are doing very well. It's a good qualification to go into some of the best law firms in the world, which could then end up with you being sent out all over the world. So it's not necessary. It is potentially a good thing to have. I remember in the old days, some of the US law firms, some of them perhaps still do, pay more money to New York qualified lawyers than English qualified lawyers. Usually discriminatory, of course, but notwithstanding that, you know, I think we can't be too precious about this. At the end of the day, some people want to come into the profession to advance themselves financially, and there are opportunities to do that.
Chris, can I extend this out as well as the New York bar, but also things like an LLM, for example?
Well, it's interesting you should mention that because, and by no means the only firm, but we've been sponsoring LLMs in law and finance and corporate law. And what I think is interesting, I'd just like to echo what Madhavi and Dominic say, because they're absolutely right. In international legal practice, as long as you're admitted somewhere, it frankly doesn't matter where. Once you're in a big firm, clients don't care where you're admitted. And I do see some young lawyers-to-be who find it difficult to get a job, even though they've almost qualified as an English solicitor. So they think, well, if I do the New York bar, it will help. If you can't get into the firm you want to get into when you're on the point of being admitted in one jurisdiction, being admitted in another is not going to help. There must be something fundamentally wrong with your CV or with your approach. And I think there's also a risk that young lawyers who've got an LPC and they can't get a training contract, they think if I do some kind of postgraduate degree, that will help. And I don't necessarily think it will. But what I do see, and I'm immensely impressed by these young people, I see young people who have qualified and worked in a firm or in-house in a bank, taking time out to do a master's, and they are incredibly well-travelled. I was talking to one only the other day who grew up in Canada, whose parents were originally from the Middle East, and they expect to pursue their career in Australia. And these are immensely well-travelled young people, and I think that is going to be the future of just a part of the legal profession, that is international legal practice. I think you'll see a lot of young lawyers who have that very sophisticated background entry.
Okay, it's just time for a quick commercial break, because I didn't say, the hashtag is, I don't think I said it, if I knew, on the Twitter. And I'm at Kevin Poulter, and you can find all the most of the panel as well, I think, on that. So do look for us on Twitter and send the questions through, so I'll check on them. One of which is, if you bear with me, about law schools. And it's effectively, bearing in mind the saturation of the legal, particularly the junior legal market at the moment, should law schools be more selective? I don't want to say the words aptitude test, oops, but is this something we should introduce? And I'm not going to Nigel, I'm going to come down this end and speak to Stephen. Is it something, did you go to law school? What was your experience at law school? How did it work?
Well, I mean, qualifying from Silex, I did all my, apart from 1 year, I did all my studies part-time when I went on to do the solicitor's qualification. I did do the LPC full-time, and I found it a very good drinking experience, actually. But it's probably from my wife is a solicitor and a law lecturer at Northumbria University in Newcastle, and certainly, without giving away commercial secrets, I mean, certainly the feedback sometimes that I get from her is some of the students that are doing the course really aren't up to it. And I think, unfortunately, the commercial sort of view takes precedence over, are we going to turn out a lot of people who are going to qualify. I mean, I know stats are important to universities, as in how many of their students then go on and become lawyers, but I do think there's still an element, obviously, if somebody, particularly I think that there are, as we've heard, a lot of foreign students that come to this country, where obviously I know fee caps don't apply, and so they're more valuable students potentially. I think there's a lot of, certainly my experience at universities and listening to what my wife has said over the years, is that the universities will not really turn anybody down. It seems to be that way anyway, and as a result you do get a lot of people who fail the examinations or at least struggle and have to go through resits, etc. So I think it's because there's always been this argument about should we cap the number of people who go to university, because there's not enough training contracts, etc. But I mean, to be honest, that's been the case for many years. There's never been enough training contracts to go around.
Do you cap the number of entrants to Silex?
We don't. No. We welcome everybody with open arms, and not being biased or anything. It's the best way to qualify.
The bar's slightly different. The bar offers scholarships. The bar offers incentives, almost to go and get training. But actually, the number of barristers that are qualifying and taking up practice certainly still seems to be reducing. Are the scholarships the right way forward, or are they just sort of the temptation, the carrots at the end of the stick?
I sit on the scholarships committee at Gray's Inn. Most of the applicants that we have coming to us for scholarships for pupillage have got debts between £40,000 and £70,000. That I don't think is unusual, I'm afraid, and I think it's scandalous. And what we do have, of course, with the current admissions policy into the BPTC is anyone is pretty much welcome. There are a large number of people who go overseas having qualified or having done their BPTC course, but the current fees, both in terms of university and in terms of the BPTC, before you even get to pupillage, are enormous. You then face pupillage, unless you go to a very smart commercial set, which will fund you to the tune, as some now do, £60,000 odd. Most criminal sets will fund you to the tune of 12 to 15,000. If you apply for criminal pupillage outside London, it is almost impossible. There are circuits now which are pupillage deserts. They do not offer them. You cannot get a pupillage in Wales or in Birmingham or the Midlands at the moment because there are no pupillages going. So something has to be done. Scholarships is a way, but there are a comparatively small number of scholarships, and they're terribly, terribly competitive. It might suit some people, but some of the natural advocates, for example, may not be very well suited to the academic bias in scholarships. I certainly wouldn't have been. I would never have got a scholarship.
How about that end of the table? Chris, did you have any involvement with recruitment at all, or with the training element?
A little, yes.
And do you find that people are coming to you applying and they don't have the aptitude, let's say, or the ability to succeed in a legal career?
No, I think there's something very odd going on, because employers seem to be saying young people aren't very good at written skills, they're not very good at communicating. But Generation Y are the best communicators there's ever been. So I think there's a disjunct between what employers want and what young people can offer. It's not because young people don't have the ability. They may not have been shown what's needed. But, and this is what I say to students that I talk to about specifically writing skills. You can write, you just can't write yet in the way that employers want, but it doesn't take much to develop that ability. So I'm very optimistic about young people's ability. I think actually in many respects they've got a skill set that when I was their age I just simply didn't have. And I think that bodes well. I think employers need to become more imaginative at adapting their requirements to what the young generation can offer, because it's a hugely talented pool of young people. So no, I don't agree with that.
Madhavi, there's a huge numbers of people doing law degrees, doing the GDL, coming through the LPC even. We just aren't enough jobs. How should we address that? Big question, I know. But how do we look at it?
Well, I know there are a number of people coming through, and a large number of people, judging by the sheer number of applications we get. Last year, I'm on the Northern School Graduate Recruitment Committee, and last year we sat down with 4,000 applications for one set of training contracts, and that's a lot. If you think, we take about 70 to 80 people every year, that's a lot of applications. So there are a large number of people coming through, but I don't see how one can actually control that. If people want to come through and if they're good enough, they will actually fall into the right stream, be it barristers or solicitors, be it a big city law firm or a small law firm in the Midlands.
I think we run a very, I agree, but I think we run a very big risk here. I mean, it's become more and more competitive, and you're absolutely right, that's reflected across all of our firms here and the bar. It's very easy in those circumstances to just pick the cream of the crop. And I've heard it said many times across the city, competitive law firms or friends and counterparts in other firms, it's amazing these days, you can just pick out the Oxbridge first, the top end. I think that we run a big risk of ending up with middle-class white males from purely Oxford. Nothing wrong with Oxford whatsoever, by the way. But I think it's really, really incumbent upon us to make sure that we broaden the net, we throw out the net much further. And as Chris said, sort of really appreciate what their talents are, their innate talents, which are going to come down the line. And it's, there's a lot of lip service given to this in the legal community, but very little action is taken to do it properly. Sorry, I didn't answer.
No,
I
sorry.
wasn't even asked to answer.
Reluctantly, within maybe 30 seconds, Nigel. Aptitude tests. Are you the gatekeeper?
Well, I could give you an example. I mean, one of the issues that's emerged from our bar course is this is not overseas students, these domestic students who come along to us with a degree from a UK law school, and they're struggling to speak English. Now, my issue is why the hell have they managed, how they managed to get through a 3-year law degree? And I would like to assume that if you've been through a 3-year law degree in any of the 100 and whatever it is law schools in this country, you can at least communicate effectively and speak in English. And that's an issue. And here, now we've got regulators saying we're going to have a bonfire of regulations. And I think that there are some fundamental issues here about what's happening in legal education from the beginning, from the moment, day one you start an LLB. I mean, my vision of law school, law's been, it should be like a medical school. And we've tried to recreate that now we're running undergraduate degrees. There are too many law schools that are preparing young people for sort of academia, taught by people that have never been over the threshold of a law firm. And you've got young people coming out who don't really understand what the environment they're coming into. And I think, I'm old-fashioned, but every 7 years the American Bar Association go into every law school, and look at see that it's functioning effectively. And that's at least a backstop. We've now washed our hands completely. We've even abolished the Joint Academic Stage Board, which I criticised because most of it was a bit dysfunctional, but nevertheless it performed a role in monitoring quality at the undergraduate stage and being assured that those young people that came through to us, LPC, BPTC, whatever, are prepared for practice. So there are some really fundamental problems. But at the end of the day, we're in a marketplace, and the best thing you can do when you're looking for an LPC provider or BPT's provider, say, right, what are your figures in employability? That's the test. Now, we declare our numbers. There are a good many universities that don't, and that speaks for itself.
Moving on. A few people have been interested in this, I'm sure, but with the legal aid situation as it is there a future for any of these people here, and any of these people here, quite frankly, particularly in the civil legal aid sector? Who's that from to that? I don't know.
Well, it's probably me, because I practice in that area. It is very challenging. the past couple of years in terms of the revolution in civil legal services, which impacts not just on what you might call traditionally publicly funded areas, but the changes that have been brought in by the Jackson reforms in respect of civil litigation generally, which isn't large-scale commercial international litigation, has made it very challenging. Now, there is not civil legal aid anymore for the vast majority of work that you would consider to be civil work. It all got abolished in April last year. And the courts are now seeing the knock-on effect of that. If you speak to most people who sit as judges in most county courts up and down the country, they will tell you that the majority of people they see these days are litigants in person, or people who are being seen by non-solicitor or non-barrister, non-legal individuals. And that is a real challenge for our judicial system. But that's what Parliament has intended. There are now about to be a fresh round of cuts to the area in which I particularly practice, which is judicial review, which is going to make it much more difficult for people to bring judicial review claims, full stop, and will also have a particular impact on claimants who currently, at the moment, it's a relatively untouched area of public funding. So I would say, yes, if you practice in certain very specialised areas where it is highly unlikely that public funding can be cut anymore, for example, in the area of care, if you want to do work on behalf of parents or children, care sectors, there will still be judicial review and legal aid, mental health, community care, education, which I practice in, they're not planning to touch that. Some aspects of housing work to do with homelessness, but other than that, unless you want to practice in those very niche areas which involve a very particular vulnerable set of individuals, there really isn't legal aid available anymore. So there's no point because it doesn't exist.
How's the criminal side of things?
How many of you want to practice in criminal law? A few.
So the question for you guys is why?
Well, Fiona's just said it is the best job in the world. I absolutely love what I do, but I'm terribly lucky and have been for an awfully long time. Most people aren't. The reality is this, you cannot now guarantee making a living at the criminal bar. My own view is this, if you're absolutely determined to do it, absolutely passionate about the subject, and have looked at and discounted every other possibility, and you've got some independent means, then it might be the thing for you.
Okay, let's open it up a little bit. Is there another question? Oh God. Yes. We're going to start with you there. Can you say who you are, where you're from, what are you doing?
My name's Jeff Harden. I'm actually a pupil at Tanfields Chambers, and we've been speaking a lot about negatives about embarking on a career in the law and the areas not to go into. But in terms of strategising your career after you've made it through the bottleneck that is training contracts or pupillage, where would you look to forward your career? And I know we said commercial, but that's so broad. Are there any particular areas that you think in 5, 10 years you could see developing a career?
Who else to have a go at that one?
Fracking, basically. The solicitor's profession grew out of the boom in the railway industry in Victorian times. It all came out of real estate, land disputes. They acted for the landed gentry in ploughing, putting railway lines down. They acted, you can see the beginnings of it in US litigation. Fracking is going to kill all sorts of disputes in terms of land ownership, in terms of rights, in terms of settlement problems, issues. It'll be a boom time for what the old PI lawyers in my generation made a lot of money out of the sort of transatlantic litigation and that sort of stuff. I think I'm being quite serious. It will be a gold mine for lawyers, both contentious and non-contentious, barristers and professionals, because it will create a huge number of disputes. And the whole area of sort of energy law and climate change law is I think will be a boom area long after I've gone.
Dominic?
I agree with that absolutely, and you know there's a huge amount going on already in that sector, a vast amount.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure. You know, I'm not keen on advising people to try and specialise too early or try and think ahead too far. You know, I mean, fundamentally, for example, real estate law, people will always buy buildings, living buildings. You know, contract law, people always want to enter into legal contracts with other people. I think fundamentally, as Michael was saying before, I mean, you know, be passionate about what you do. If you're absolutely determined to become a criminal lawyer, criminal barrister or solicitor, go for it. At the end of the day, try not to think too much about the future. I mean, I wanted to be a litigator. I qualified into reinsurance litigation, then changed my mind. I mean, you know, just keep your mind open, I think. And it can be as simple as an inspiring mentor, an inspiring supervisor, an inspiring pupil, barrister, or whatever.
Stephen, you're a personal injury lawyer. Is the golden age for personal injury over? Are people still getting into bumps and scrapes?
Well, yeah, people are always going to have accidents.
Will the council always pay out?
Well, they do when you people on tripping cases, I do, but yeah, very, very difficult. But I think, I mean, when I set my firm up 10 years ago, people said the golden age had gotten in because it was all on prohibitive costs and the normal hourly rate had disappeared. But everyone said to me, why are you giving up a well-paid job and setting up a firm? It's all going downhill, and now obviously it's all going downhill again. I think it'll always be there. I mean, it's certainly hard work. It's certainly difficult. And again, it's this thing about being passionate about it. I mean, the greatest satisfaction. I mean, I used to act for defendants for a number of years. I used to defend police forces when they were sued. I used to defend local authorities when in sexual abuse claims. And you know, you did a good job. You didn't get a thank you, but of an individual, if you've got someone who's been seriously hurt and you actually help them get their life back on track, I think it's one of the most satisfying things. That's the thing, you've got to get, whatever job you do, whatever area of law you're in, you've got to get some satisfaction out of that. You've got to feel passionate about it, as the rest of the panel have said, because otherwise, what's the point? But in relation to a new area, I still believe that second-hand smoke will be the new asbestos in the future.
Don't say that.
What about bar? Is there a gap? Like, I remember going back a few years. But I remember when I was qualifying, everyone was being told going to commercial property, going to commercial property. Like we said over there, going to commercial property. There's a huge boom in commercial property. Then the whole market collapsed. Everyone's being made redundant from commercial property, retraining into wills and probate because people always die.
Isn't the moral of the story?
That's a change.
As was just said a few minutes ago, is be flexible, keep your options open, look at what interests you, and what interests you now may not be what interests you when you actually start work. So keep your options open. I started as a general common lawyer and ended up specialising in building contract law and criminal law. There wasn't really much choice as far as I was concerned about which I was going to actually go for. But if I'd found building contract law a little more interesting, that might be what I was doing, might be what I'd be doing now.
Well, I think it depends. The bar's a very small profession, and I would agree. I mean, your aspirations can change over time. I mean, I'm not doing the same thing now as I was when I was a pupil. I don't do crime anymore, for a start. But I think what's boom time at the bar can change quite rapidly. For example, 12 years ago, 15 years ago, planning was enormous. Now, there's been huge changes in planning law. So there's a lot less planning law than there was. It may well be that it will come back up again. So something like that. But at the bar, I mean, in terms of like thinking what is likely to be an issue, IP, you know, English law, English IP law, and most English IP barristers also practice a lot in Frankfurt. That is, I can see that's a big growth area with social media and with the growth of the use of the internet, those applications. If you're a human rights lawyer, kind of international human rights law, a lot of English lawyers now do work not just within this jurisdiction, but both within the criminal tribunals that have been set up around the world, including at the moment in The Hague, in Cambodia, those sorts of things, but also some more general international human rights work, and I can see that being a big growth area in the future.
So flexibility seems to be the key. Now, just a quick question for you guys. How many people are looking for a training contract or pupillage or any sort of work whatsoever? Okay, the majority. So I'm going to go to questions over here in a minute. But a quick question. How long should you keep pursuing your dream before you actually think, Tesco's is looking quite attractive?
This is probably the only way to pay the bills. So, you know.
It's a very individual question. There are too many factors for anyone to, I think, give any sort of glib answer to this. It depends on your own financial circumstances. One of the most successful criminal practitioners I know at the moment, without naming any names, couldn't find pupillage for 3.5 years, but he did, and he's now extremely successful. Others wouldn't have been able to tolerate that, and it all depends on your own individual circumstances. I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer.
Okay, I'll change the question slightly. What should you be doing in the meantime?
Well, I think we talked earlier about additional qualifications, which qualifications are always good, but I'm a great believer in practical experience. I mean, there's so many good courses out there that young sort of students can help. I mean, pro bono is a big area to get into, sort of local law centres, etc. Because if you turn up for an interview or apply for a training contract and you say, right, academically I'm spot on, brilliant, when I see CVs, I mean, that's all very well and good, but one of the other things you always look for is what was the other experience this person has got. And that might be something entirely outside of the law that could be useful, but I would certainly say look at your local law centres, look where you can help the community you live in. It may be something as simple as getting involved in, I got involved in my local village in campaign against a speed limit, getting reduced, we were trying to get that knocked down to 30 miles an hour. But it was obviously something where I could use my legal knowledge. So you guys have got a lot of legal knowledge. You've got obviously the experience of doing a degree or whichever route you came via. And if you can actually use that and get some practical experience at the same time, your CV is going to be sort of, look a lot better really to a prospective employer. I'd say that's certainly one thing I would look at. And obviously if you are working, I know what happens in our neck of the woods in the northeast is a lot of the bigger firms take on your LPC graduates, your law graduates as paralegals or whatever they call them, and then with this carrot of the training contract, which probably only 1 in 20 get or whatever. I mean, one option, which obviously I'm bound to say this, is you can actually qualify as a lawyer via the Silex route if you've got a law degree, or if you've got the LPC, you can get exemptions and qualify as a lawyer that way. So there are alternative options to actually just getting a training contract. I qualified as a solicitor without doing a training contract at all because I was exempt. And that is a good way to do it because then you don't have that hassle of actually finding one.
What should you be doing?
Well, I think it depends how much money you've got. Because there are loads of brilliant opportunities for you to go. You can go and do a stage at the European Commission, at the ECJ. They're always looking for people. Christopher Vargas looking for someone at the moment to start in January. I got an email about that on Friday to go and be one of his assistants. But you don't get paid very much money to do it. You can go to Strasbourg. You can go pretty much anywhere around the world if you're willing not to be paid for it and have amazing experiences. But I think as well, certainly when we interview people for pupillage who've been out of the game, we expect them to have done something maybe law related. So for example, maybe volunteering at a law centre or something like that if there's been a time. But we also recognise that you all have bills to pay and massive debts. So if you say, I've been in interviews where somebody said, look, I've been a secretary or I've been somebody's secretary for a year, it paid me £30,000 a year. It enabled me to do work at night in something I was interested in, but I needed to start paying my debts back. And so I think, certainly from our perspective in recruitment people, we realise that there has to be a balance between doing all these amazing things that you can do for free and earning a living or scraping by, being able to pay the rent on your flat.
I totally agree with Fiona. It depends entirely on how much money you have. When we look at CVs, we look at what you've been doing in that time, and I again agree with Fiona. If you've been doing a law-related job, that will count a little bit more than if you've been doing something completely unrelated. So that's
Is there a risk here that what we're talking about is that people who've got some cash behind them can afford to go out there and get the legal experience? How particularly you're dealing with applications. How do you balance that? Do you look at the people and say, well, they've got great work experience, they've not been paid for the past 2 years, but they've got great work experience, therefore we'll take them? Or do you say, well, this guy's actually, or girl's been forced into working down local greengrocers and to pay the bills, to pay back their student loans and put them to one side?
To be honest, it depends. It's very, very individual. You know, and that's why, you know, at partner level,
Sorry, I'm not picking on you.
No, you're not picking on it. That's fine. At partner level, we get involved in looking at CVs because it's looking at who's individual and what the circumstances are. There isn't a formula that we use. There isn't a list of universities that we have say tick, tick, tick. You know, let's interview them because then we'd all be the same. And what we are looking for is the individual who's going to make the difference. And that's why. You know, me myself, along with 3 other partners, spend time looking at CV. So it depends, you know. If the CV looks nice and appeals to me, yes, you're in.
It's like a May Brown.
You see, I agree with the comment you make. I think there is too much either conscious or subconscious bias when people are looking at CVs in relation to purely law-related work experience and all sorts of other ways as well. And I think that, again, I'll go back to the sort of stuck record in this regard. It really is incumbent upon us to make sure we look further and don't just choose those people who happen to have had the best experience. And frankly, it's a little boring as well. You see CVs these days where it's A stars all over the shop. They've all overcome some adversity, climbed a mountain, worked for charity, etc. Sometimes it's quite interesting to see someone do something a bit different, go out and do something a bit interesting in the real world before they come to the legal profession.
Slightly changing question slightly, just for Nigel and Chris here, because I want them to join in. The University of Law, College of Law, as it was, doing great things in terms of promoting pro bono to students, getting people out there into projects.
Sure.
Possibly, like one of the leaders, in fact. I know when I was at the College of Law, I was one of the first people out there doing things in Doncaster. Use all the help you can get. This is true. But Chris as well. Is pro bono one of those things that you look for? Is that a tick box? Or there's so many people doing it now because they've come through university doing pro bono, they've come through law school doing pro bono work. They're even encouraged to do now the training contracts, and then all of a sudden it just stops. What do you look for? Is it a commitment? Is it the project? Is it what do you think is the way forward?
Well, it's of course what we look for. I mean, you know, I go back to my vision of
So
the law
what
school.
would you offer?
The vision of a law school should be, you know, the law school's not doing its job unless part of its curriculum is introducing young people to their civic responsibilities as lawyers, and it ticks the box there in terms of you know, you're part of the profession, and therefore you have a duty to society to put something back. But secondly, it's fantastic preparation for real life legal lawyers, because you know you're actually engaging with the public. And if you can build that into the curriculum, everyone said, well, we were too big to do it, but we did. You know, we've got about 2,500 students now who actually engage in some form of pro bono activity. Some of it is advice centres, some of it is prison work, some of it is schools. But I mean, I'd like kind of just briefly answer the main question. That is to say, well, those of you with LLBs and you haven't done an LPC yet, you know, think about alternative routes. You know, I'm not here to advertise, but our fastest growing route to the LPC is the online version, where you can actually become a paralegal and actually take the LPC online with some face-to-face over a period of years. If you've got the LPC, then broaden your horizons. One of the fastest growing sectors in in-house work is the whole business of compliance. You know, you go and talk to United Utilities and the in-house lawyers there. They're having to deal with all the regulators, they're having to deal with the whole lot. They're looking for a new generation of young people to take into their in-house departments. And someone who's got an LPC, who's done litigation, can understand risk, who's done business law and practice, and you know, is a valuable. I think one of the things we're working on with the particularly in-house is to get them to acknowledge the value of an LPC as a postgraduate qualification, and for that matter, BPTC, as a way into a particular sector that's going to grow massively. Because you talk to General Counsel, and one of the issues there is the whole issue of compliance and dealing with an increasing regulatory environment.
Going back to the original question, I would say never give up. If you're passionate to be a lawyer, you'll find a way. I know a brilliant young man whose parents were first-generation immigrants, and they have a small shop in Birmingham. He went to a terrible school, and he managed to get from that school to a not very good university, and he paid his way through university. He's still, even now, on weekends, he goes back to the family shop and he stacks the shelves. And from there, he blagged an internship with an MP. He paid his way through what was then College of Law at Store Street, and he applied to big firms for a training contract. He was turned down by all of them. So he became a paralegal, and he rang me up before Christmas. He'd been a paralegal at a Magic Circle firm for 2 years, and he rang me up. He said, they're going to interview me for a training contract. So I said, we're going to have dinner as soon as you're free, next day. So we had dinner, and he's one of these very smart young people who's really good at networking in the best way. So he doesn't try to exploit people who might be in a position to help him. He tries to get information from them. I wasn't the only one who was very pleased to help him. And so we talked through the sort of things that he could refer to in the interview that would show his experience. And 2 or 3 weeks later, he rang me up. He said, I've been given a training contract. This is a person whose parents were new to this country, and he's been given a training contract at a Magic Circle firm, and I have absolutely no doubt he'll become a partner there because he is absolutely outstanding. So don't give up. Never give up.
Send me a CV.
Any more
Less
questions?
opportunities for partnership.
Oh, so one that's straight up there, go for it.
Thank you. Can non-native speakers of English make it at the bar / in the solicitor profession?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Okay, that's an easy one, we can move on. Next question. Yes.
It's more intense in criminal law. Solicitor or barrister?
Solicitor or barrister at the criminal bar?
Well,
And in
criminal
crime,
sector.
Criminal sector, oh, sorry.
depends
Criminal
what you're
sector.
interested in doing. Some people are better suited to the litigation function, preparing the cases. Some people are better suited to the advocacy function. You can do both as a solicitor. You can really only do one at the moment at the bar, although depending on the way ABSs go and how different firms and sets will organise themselves, and there is already a move from certainly some barristers' chambers to organise themselves with solicitors. It depends on what your particular interest is.
But I think, if I may, I mean, what's implicit in your comments earlier, Fiona, is that the bar isn't the be-all and end-all for criminal litigation. That the profession has changed. Solicitors do a huge amount of criminal litigation, and it's very, very tough getting into the bar. So think about qualifying solicitor. Go work for Kingsley Napoli or Owen Mitchell's crime department, where you actually get experience in flying hours. And learn the skills, the pre-trial skills of case management and case analysis, and then transfer to the bar. A lot of jurisdictions around the world, in Canada and Australia, they all qualify first as solicitors, and then they go into the litigation department, and then they transfer to the bar. There's something to be said for that approach.
We've just mentioned the diversity question. Dominic touched on it briefly. Well, one of the consequences of the recession, you mentioned pupillage deserts, the rising cost of legal education, mean that 30, 40 years time we will turn around, look at the judicial profession for QCs, high performance solicitors, and it will be exactly the same makeup as it is now.
Potentially.
Well,
Potentially, yes. I mean, it's a risk.
isn't
In
that what
publicly
all
funded
the
work, yes.
But isn't that what all the reports over the past 10 years have already said? I mean, the Milburn report, which Lord Neuberger was talking about it in his speech in the Supreme Court yesterday, was that the legal profession in particular has an issue with diversity, particularly socio-economic diversity. And with the changes that Mukul and I were talking about, I mean, the fact that Mukul's saying you need money behind you to think about a career at the criminal bar, I mean, we're going back to...
We're 20 or 30 years behind other professions. I mean, not just...
And going further back.
And going further
No,
back. I mean, women in our profession. It's an absolute
Outrageous.
disgrace that we still
I
have
agree.
major law
Women in the
firms
profession
with
is a disgrace.
10%, 12% partners who are women. I mean, absolutely.
I think, I'm not quite as negative as that. I actually think that in a few years' time, the solicitor's qualification will be more like the accountancy qualification, where we're getting traction from ABSs and some of the smaller firms in what reinvented what used to be called the old 5-year route. The old 5-year route was basically young people with the workplace. Now that was all memory exams. The contemporary version of that is to do an online or part-time LD from the workplace, and an online and part-time LPC from the workplace. I think that's the way of bringing in a more diverse. With the benefit of hindsight, the biggest mistake we made was making a graduate profession, because we didn't realise that higher education would go the way it's gone, the cost being pushed on the students or their parents and the loans. And therefore, I actually think that driving forward, it will be from learning from the workplace, and that'll be the way.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Lord Newberger actually praised Silex for diversity in that report as well.
Oh.
which I've got to get
Pay
up,
for adverts.
because we have the greatest proportion of female members, greatest proportion of ethnic minority members. So no, things are changing, and I think with the GAC, the Judicial Appointments Commission, I think the judiciary over time, when that filters through to the top levels, will actually change drastically. Fingers
Well,
crossed.
everybody's very keen for it to change.
Yeah.
Within the profession itself, everybody's very
That's the
keen
problem.
to keep things as diverse as possible. You know, the senior judiciary are as keen on diversity as all of us around this table, but there's a difference between talking about it and being able to do it.
So what's the stumbling block? Inertia, not possible, government,
Money.
money?
I mean, to be honest with you, it's money. For our profession anyway.
Go for it. Loud voice.
This is for the bar primarily, and it's not a question, it's an invitation to comment. But as a young person who's constantly getting discouraged from doing the bar, doing it, there's no money, you need all this experience, can somebody please say something positive about why they do what they do and why they do it? Otherwise, I may as well just end it all now. That would be really great.
No. What you mustn't do is even think about ending it all now. If this is something that you're really, it's what we spoke about earlier, if it's something you're really passionate about, I can tell you that in my 30-odd years, I have had so many real highs, much better than any drug that you'll ever find, just by doing my job and by hearing whether it's, at the end of the case, the right word or two words spoken by a jury or by the judge or by a court of appeal judge saying the right thing, and you walk out of there on cloud nine.
But also being at the bar is not the end of the road. I mean, people who take a legal qualification, this goes back to the subject as well as, are there too many people getting legal qualifications? No, not necessarily. The amount of people who use that and go on and serve, in various different other professions, in the corporate world, in the banking world. I mean, you can take your qualification as a barrister and take it anywhere.
There are lots of people who are very
Abroad.
successful in the city who all were barristers and they never really pursued it and went to the city instead, a few years ago. So yeah, I mean, I've always been slightly dubious about how portable it is as a qualification, but plainly it is, because there are other people who are very successful who did the BPTC, or the equivalent as it then was, and are now very successful in other areas of life.
Even in my chambers, which is pretty much a criminal stroke regulatory sort of chambers, I'm getting people who are being headhunted by companies and firms, including firms of solicitors, for particular areas. And they know that we provide an extremely good grounding. There's a very high knowledge base and skill base which they want to exploit.
In particular, white collar crime, which is an area, if you wanted to pick another area, which is going to be a major thing for the future, the amount of work in that area, and you'll see firms, large firms like ours, actually moving more and more into that field.
And very often they will use,
Unless it's publicly funded.
well, and they will use people like Muckle, or they will try and headhunt people like Muckle, who will then go around the world doing white collar crime, not just in the UK, but in other jurisdictions as well.
But with the complaints, you'll like what you do. It's worth it. It's one good thing someone to say.
Okay.
Worth it job satisfaction and not in revenue.
Yeah, it's a brilliant job. It's a really, really brilliant, exciting, fun, stressful, fun maybe is the wrong word, stressful, difficult, but really, really rewarding job.
Okay, put things on pause here
Barristers
for
have
one
much
moment.
better anecdotes at dinner parties.
Yes.
Put
It's
things
a
on
sexy
pause.
profession.
And then allow the panel to think about one line answers short sentences, in fact, to this question. What's the one thing that people can take away and do to make themselves more attractive to employers? Think about it. Either future employers, whether they're in jobs or not. But what's the one thing that people can take away and they can do?
When you
So, think about it, because it's the time you've been waiting for. It's not the free bar. It's the draw for the iPad. Fantastic. I have got a number in here, so I best not draw it myself. No. You thought about your answer.
I'm thinking.
Are you thinking? Okay. Well, where should we go? Have you got it? You've got one in here. Okay. Let's bring it up. Come on up. Come on up. Yes. Let's have Legal Cheek's very own. Round of applause, please, Tom. There you go. No looking. No looking. Straight in that. Just the one ticket. Not that generous. The number is. You ready? 1. 5. 3. We have a winner, hopefully.
Oh, bloody hell.
Yay! Good to see. Oh, ICLR. Congratulations. There you go. I don't know, some ceremonial handshake. Well, round of applause. Coming here, what's the one thing that people can do to make themselves more attractive to a potential employer?
I think I've heard about passions for the job. I think you've got to somehow get that across. When I went for interviews, I showed I was passionate. I showed that I knew things about the job. And if you ensure, because the person who will be interviewing you will no doubt be passionate about the area they work in. So if you can match that passion, I think that's really a key thing.
Demonstrate determination.
Very short. I'm impressed.
If you're filling your time while you're trying to get a position, you're much more likely to impress Madhavi, Don, myself, or any of us if you think about your CV, not in terms of how worthy is it, but why am I doing it? Because why I'm doing it is much more likely to impress us than is this going to look good on my CV?
Slightly not going to answer the question, but give you some advice. And this is the point Chris made, which I want to make, and that is extending the net. I've just two things. We're opening in Leeds, and I've been working. One thing. And secondly, I was a judge at the Manchester Law Society Awards, and I was astonished by the amount of innovation that's coming through some very small, medium-sized firms in the regions. And don't be obsessed about working for a global firm. There's some fantastic new businesses emerging by young people that actually understand how to run a business, not for maintaining profits for partner next year, but actually to build a sustainable business. So broaden your net and look at some of these commercial firms that are developing, particularly in the north.
I don't know you ever say brevity.
Nothing wrong in working for a global firm.
No.
The one thing I will say is what I look for is your USP, your unique selling point. What can you bring to the person you're talking to, your firm you're behind you?
I'd agree with everything you said before. but also just, in particular, thinking very hard about why you want to do what you're doing and why you're applying to this particular type of firm. Lots of people don't think about that in the cover letter or in the questionnaire, why do you want to be a lawyer? And also, good, diverse work experience, something a bit different.
So finally, the last words.
Be well informed. I talk to a lot of young people who say they want to be this or that, and when you actually engage in a discussion with them, beneath the veneer of their apparent desire to enter a profession or do a particular job, they actually know nothing about it, and that's not impressive. So when you meet people who are well informed, don't try to show them how good you are, but use them to extract that information which will make you better informed when you come to an interview. So be well informed about what it is you want to do.
Thank you. I know a lot of you have still got questions. Hopefully some of the panellists will stick around because there are free drinks at the back. Not just because of that, I'm sure. No, of course. But for the time being, a round of applause for the panellists. Please keep reading Legal Cheek on a regular basis, at least 3 times a day. And it's good to see you. Tell your friends about us. We'll be here for, well, I don't know, until we get kicked out. So make merry, but remember, potential employers, get as many cards as you can, and don't forget to follow up on the invitations. Good to see you. Thank you very much.
Well, let's